Have you ever felt like everything was falling apart at the same time? Not slowly, not one issue after another, but all at once, as if life decided to test every part of you in a single moment. You wake up already tired, not because you didn't sleep, but because your mind never truly rested, thoughts looping, questions without answers, a quiet pressure in your chest that follows you through the day. You try to stay strong. You tell yourself it will pass. You remind yourself that others have it worse. Yet deep down something feels off. It's not just one problem. It's the feeling that no matter what you do, nothing seems to respond. You push harder and things resist. You stay positive and life stays silent. You try to figure it out and the confusion grows. And at some point, you stop asking how to fix things and start wondering why this is happening to you at all. Why does effort feel heavy instead of empowering? Why does hope sometimes feel exhausting? Why does it seem like the more you care, the less control you have? Late at night, these questions get louder. You replay moments that haven't happened yet. You imagine conversations that might never take place. You prepare for outcomes you don't even want. And in those quiet moments, a subtle thought appears. Maybe I'm missing something. Not because you haven't tried, but because trying doesn't feel like it's working anymore. You look around and notice people who don't seem smarter, luckier, or more disciplined, yet somehow life moves for them. Doors open. Help arrives. Timing works out. And you're left wondering what they know that you don't. But what if the difference isn't knowledge? What if it isn't effort either? What if the real shift has nothing to do with doing more, and everything to do with how you're responding internally? Because there comes a point where effort stops creating movement and starts creating resistance. And if you've reached that point, this moment isn't random. You're not here by accident. You're here because something is ready to change. Not outside you, within you. And once you see it, the struggle you've been carrying will finally begin to loosen. There is nothing wrong with you. Let that land for a moment. You are not failing at life. You are not weak. You are not missing some secret that everyone else figured out without you. What you're experiencing is not a flaw. It's a pattern that was taught. From the very beginning, most of us were conditioned to believe that effort equals results. That if something isn't working, the answer is to try harder, think more, push longer, and stay strong no matter how heavy it feels inside. So when life doesn't move, we assume the problem must be us. But that assumption quietly creates tension. And tension changes the way you show up to everything. It turns hope into pressure. It turns desire into anxiety. It turns patience into waiting. You didn't choose this response, you learned it. You learned to overthink instead of trust. You learned to explain your problems instead of expecting solutions. You learned to prepare for disappointment so it wouldn't hurt as much if it came. And none of that means you're broken. It means you adapted. You adapted to uncertainty the only way you knew how, by staying alert, by staying busy mentally, by staying in control. But what no one explained is that the mind doesn't relax when it's trying to control everything. It stays tense, and a tense mind sends mixed signals. On the surface, you may be saying all the right things, but underneath there's a quiet, "What if this doesn't work?" And life responds to that underlying state, not the surface words. So if you've ever felt guilty for feeling tired of trying to stay positive, that guilt can go now. You weren't doing anything wrong. You were simply responding to life from a place of caution instead of certainty. This is why reassurance never seems to last, why motivation fades quickly, why the same problems keep looping in different forms. Because reassurance tries to calm the mind, but it doesn't change the inner position. And the inner position is everything. You were never taught how to stand internally when things feel uncertain. You were taught to react, to fix, to plan, to worry, to prepare. So when things don't move, your mind does what it was trained to do, it tightens. But tightening doesn't create safety. It creates resistance. And resistance doesn't mean you're blocked. It means you're holding on too hard. Think about the moments in your life when things did work out unexpectedly, times when help appeared, when timing aligned, When something resolved without you forcing it. Notice how those moments felt. There was less effort, less mental noise, less trying to control the outcome. You weren't chasing certainty, you were resting in it. That's not coincidence. It's the natural state of the mind when it feels safe enough to allow life to respond. And this is where trust begins, not blind trust, not pretending everything is okay, but a quieter trust that says, I don't need to fight this. When you hear trust, you might think it means waiting passively. It doesn't. It means releasing the need to prove, justify, or constantly check if things are working yet. Because checking is another form of doubt. And doubt isn't loud, it's subtle. It sounds like logic. It disguises itself as preparation. It feels responsible, but over time it drains you. And once you understand this, something important happens. The pressure lifts. You stop blaming yourself. You stop measuring your worth by outcomes. You stop treating every delay as a personal failure. You realize you've been responding to life in the only way you were taught. And now, you're about to learn a different way. A way that doesn't require force. A way that doesn't exhaust you. A way that feels calm, grounded, and strangely powerful. And from this place, things begin to shift, not because you're trying harder, but because you're finally standing differently on the inside. Most people never realize that the very thing they believe will fix their life is often what keeps it stuck. They believe effort is the answer. So when something doesn't move, they add more effort. They think more, they plan more, they repeat the same ideas in different ways, hoping one of them will finally break through. But effort, when it comes from tension, doesn't create progress. It creates pressure, and pressure quietly tells the mind something is wrong. This is where most people get trapped without knowing it. On the outside, they look disciplined, motivated, and committed. On the inside, they're bracing themselves, waiting for proof that things will finally work out. And waiting is not neutral. Waiting carries doubt. It's not dramatic doubt. It's subtle. It's the kind that sounds reasonable, the kind that says, I'll believe it when I see it. The kind that keeps checking, measuring, comparing, and every time you check, you reinforce the feeling that nothing has happened yet. So the mind stays alert, tense, prepared for disappointment. Most people think they're being realistic in this state, but realism without alignment becomes resistance, because life doesn't respond to monitoring, it responds to expectation. Think about the things in your life that feel inevitable, not because you want them, but because you assume them. You don't obsess over whether the sun will rise tomorrow. You don't visualize it. You don't affirm it. You expect it. That expectation is quiet, stable, and unquestioned. Now compare that to the things you're trying to change. Notice how much explanation surrounds them. How much effort goes into making sure they happen. The mind is doing that because it doesn't feel settled, and an unsettled mind sends mixed signals. This is why many people say, I've been doing everything right, but nothing is changing. What they mean is, I've been repeating actions while staying in the same inner position. The position of effort, the position of hoping, the position of convincing. And convincing never works on the subconscious. The subconscious doesn't respond to repetition alone. It responds to assumption. If something feels assumed, the mind reorganizes around it. If it feels uncertain, the mind stays defensive. This is why people can repeat affirmations for years and feel drained instead of empowered. Because the words are being spoken from a place of effort, not authority. Authority doesn't strain, it doesn't argue, it doesn't try to prove itself, it simply is. But most people were never taught how to stand in authority internally. They were taught to push, to strive, to hustle mentally. So when something matters deeply, they grip it tighter, and gripping creates resistance. Think of trying to force sleep. The harder you try, the more awake you become. Not because sleep is difficult, but because effort keeps the mind active. The same principle applies to life outcomes. When the mind is over-engaged, it interferes with natural movement. So the problem isn't that people want too much. It's that they're holding their desire with tension instead of certainty. And tension signals, not yet. This is why solutions seem to arrive when people stop obsessing. when they let go not in defeat but in relief, when the mind relaxes enough to allow a different response. That's not luck, that's alignment. And once you understand this, you stop asking, "What more should I do?" and start asking a much more powerful question. From what inner position am I speaking to life? Because life responds to position, not pressure. And until that position shifts, effort alone will keep producing the same results, no matter how hard you try. Long before modern psychology gave language to it, this principle was already understood. Not as theory, as law. Joseph Murphy explained that the subconscious mind does not argue, analyze, or weigh possibilities. It accepts what is impressed upon it as true, and then it acts accordingly. Not through magic, but through behavior, perception, timing, and opportunity. The subconscious is not moved by effort. It is moved by belief that feels settled. This is why two people can say the same words and experience completely different results. One speaks from certainty, the other speaks from hope. And hope, while comforting, still carries uncertainty. Life does not respond to words, it responds to the state behind them. This is the hidden law most people overlook. They focus on technique instead of position. They repeat phrases instead of shifting assumption. They try to impress the mind rather than speak from it. Murphy taught that when an idea is accepted by the subconscious, it begins to externalize. Not instantly, not dramatically, but inevitably. The outer world reorganizes itself around the inner assumption. But acceptance does not come from repetition alone. It comes from relaxation into certainty. This is why forcing belief backfires. The more you strain to believe something, the more the mind registers doubt. Effort signals that the idea has not yet been accepted. The subconscious listens to tone, not volume. It listens to calm confidence, not emotional urgency. This is why fear-based affirmations fail. They carry the very energy they're trying to escape. And the subconscious, being literal, mirrors the feeling rather than the intention. Murphy often emphasized that prayer is not begging, it is not pleading, it is not repeating requests in desperation. True prayer is the assumption of the feeling of the wish fulfilled, not excitement, not relief, but normalcy. When something feels normal, the subconscious accepts it as real. This is a critical distinction. Most people wait for evidence before they relax, but the subconscious waits for relaxation before it produces evidence. This reversal is what confuses people. They think belief comes after results. In reality, results follow belief, and belief is not emotional intensity, it is inner agreement. Agreement happens when the mind stops resisting an idea and allows it to feel natural. This is why a single moment of deep certainty can override years of struggle. Not because it's dramatic, but because it shifts the dominant assumption. Once the assumption changes, behavior changes subtly, perception sharpens. Opportunities that were always present become visible. Decisions feel easier. Timing improves. Not because life suddenly favors you, but because you are no longer blocking response with doubt. This law operates whether you know it or not. If you assume things are hard, life reflects effort. If you assume things work out, life reflects flow. Neither assumption is moral, neither is rewarded or punished. They are simply mirrored. And this is where authority is born. Authority is not control over circumstances, it is alignment with expectation. When you expect something calmly, you stop interfering with the process, and the subconscious, free from conflict, begins to coordinate outcomes on your behalf. This is not positive thinking, it is positional thinking. You are not trying to convince life of anything, you are aligning your inner state with a chosen outcome. And once that alignment settles, life has no choice but to respond. Because this law is not optional, it is constant. The only question is whether you are using it consciously or letting it operate by default. And when you finally see that, everything changes. The moment you understand this, the entire struggle begins to make sense. Here is the part most people never hear clearly. Life does not respond when you ask from uncertainty. It responds when you speak from certainty. Not loudly, not emotionally, not repeatedly, but quietly, as if the decision has already been made. This is the shift. Up until now, most of your effort has been aimed at creating belief. You repeated words hoping they would convince your mind. You visualized outcomes, trying to feel something strong enough to make them real. You waited for reassurance before allowing yourself to relax. But certainty doesn't come from effort. Certainty comes from decision. A decision is different from a desire. Desire says, I want this to happen. Decision says, this is settled. And the body knows the difference. When you desire something, your nervous system stays alert. When you decide something, your nervous system relaxes. That relaxation is the signal. Because a relaxed mind does not argue with itself, it does not explain, it does not negotiate, it assumes. This is why a single sentence spoken from absolute inner alignment can change an entire situation, while hundreds of affirmations spoken from tension do nothing. The power was never in repetition, it was never in emotion, it was in authority. Authority is calm. Authority does not rush. It does not plead. It does not check constantly to see if things are working yet. It states, and then it moves on. Most people think authority means force. In reality, force is compensation for doubt. True authority is quiet confidence. Think about the moments in your life when you knew something was done. Not hoped, not wished. Known. Notice how you behaved afterward. You didn't keep talking about it. You didn't keep proving it. You didn't keep seeking reassurance. You carried on. That inner carry on state is what the subconscious responds to. So the core revelation is simple but precise. You stop trying to make things happen and start speaking as if they already are, not pretending, not fantasizing, but assuming. Assumption is not imagination, it is acceptance. It is the feeling that this outcome belongs to you, not emotionally, but naturally. This is why people often say, it just clicked, or I don't know why, but I knew it would work out. They didn't add effort. They removed resistance. And resistance is always mental. It shows up as explaining the problem over and over, as checking for signs, as wondering if you're doing it right. Certainty does none of that. Certainty chooses a position and rests there. So when you speak, you don't speak to life. You speak from a settled state. A state that says, this is handled. A state that says, this is done. A state that says, I don't need to fight this anymore. And once you speak from that place, even briefly, the subconscious accepts the instruction. From there, things begin to reorganize. Not because you force them, but because you stop interfering. You notice different options. You respond instead of react. You move with clarity instead of urgency. And life mirrors that clarity. This is the moment where effort transforms into alignment, where struggle turns into movement, where words stop being wishes and start becoming commands. Not commands shouted outward, commands issued inward. And once the inner command is given, the outer world follows, calmly, naturally, inevitably. Once this shift happens internally, the results don't arrive with fireworks or drama. They arrive quietly, often in ways that feel almost ordinary. And that's how you know it's real. One man had been struggling with his work for years. Not because he lacked skill, but because every opportunity felt unstable. Contracts would almost work out, then fall apart. Promises were made, then delayed. Each time, he told himself to stay positive, but underneath he was always bracing for disappointment. When he stopped trying to convince himself and instead made a calm internal decision, a simple, settled statement that his work was supported and consistent, something changed. He didn't repeat it. He didn't visualize it daily. He simply accepted it as done. Within weeks, a conversation he almost ignored turned into a steady collaboration. The work didn't feel forced. The timing felt natural. And the biggest difference wasn't the outcome, it was how little effort it took once he stopped interfering. Another woman had been stuck in a painful relationship dynamic. She replayed conversations endlessly, trying to find the right words, the right approach, the right moment. Her mind was always working, always preparing. And the more she tried to fix it, the more tense the situation became. When she shifted her inner position, she didn't confront anyone. She didn't rehearse speeches. She simply decided calmly how she expected to be treated, not as a hope, but as a settled fact. Her behavior changed without effort. Her tone softened. Her reactions slowed, and within days, the dynamic began to shift. Not because she forced change, but because she stopped signaling uncertainty. Then there was a man who had been living in constant anxiety about money, not because he was reckless, but because every bill triggered a sense of urgency. He tried affirmations, budgeting, and planning, all useful tools, but the anxiety remained. When he applied this principle, he didn't deny reality. He didn't ignore responsibility. He made one internal declaration that his financial needs were handled in a way he didn't need to manage mentally every day. That single assumption changed how he interacted with opportunities. He stopped scanning for threats and started noticing options. A side opportunity emerged that fit naturally into his life. No stress, no pressure, just movement. These stories aren't about luck, they're about signal. Life responds to the dominant signal you send, not through words but through state. When your state shifts from effort to certainty, your choices shift. Your timing improves, your nervous system stops blocking intuition, and when that happens, things move, often faster than expected. Not because the world changed overnight, but because you stopped standing in your own way. This is why some people say, "Once I stopped trying so hard, everything clicked." They didn't stop caring, they stopped forcing, and forcing is always a sign of doubt. When the inner conflict dissolves, the outer friction follows. This is also why results often show up after people give up, not in resignation but in relief. When the mind finally relaxes its grip, life has space to respond. These shifts don't require perfection, they require honesty. An honest look at how you've been speaking to life internally. Have you been explaining your problems more than expecting solutions? Have you been monitoring progress instead of trusting movement? Have you been repeating effort instead of resting in decision? Once you see this pattern, you can't unsee it. And the moment you choose differently, even once, the signal changes. Not everything transforms instantly, but something important does. The tension leaves, and in the absence of tension, movement begins. This is how real change happens, not through pressure, not through struggle, but through a quiet, internal shift that tells life without doubt, "I've decided." Now the question becomes simple and practical. How do you apply this in real life? Not in perfect conditions, not in some future moment when everything is calm, but right in the middle of uncertainty. The first step is awareness. Notice when your mind starts explaining the problem. Explaining is not solving. It's a signal that the mind is trying to regain control. The moment you catch yourself replaying the same story, pause. You don't need to finish the thought. Instead, shift your position. Choose one short sentence that implies resolution, not desire, not hope. Resolution. It should feel calm, almost ordinary. If it feels emotional or urgent, it's not the right sentence yet. Something that feels like a conclusion, not a request. Then say it once, internally or out loud. And stop. This is important. Do not repeat it to make it work. Repetition from effort cancels authority. Authority speaks once and moves on. After that, return to your day, not with excitement, with normalcy. Normalcy is the signal of acceptance. The second step is restraint. Resist the urge to check if things are working yet. Checking seems harmless, but it quietly tells the mind that the outcome is still uncertain. Every time you check, you step out of authority and back into effort. If the mind asks, "Is it happening?" answer with silence. Silence is confidence. The third step is behavior alignment. This doesn't mean forcing action. It means allowing your actions to reflect expectation instead of fear. You'll notice subtle changes. You'll speak more clearly. You'll pause before reacting. You'll feel less rushed. These are not techniques. They are symptoms of certainty. If fear appears, don't fight it. Fighting reinforces it. Let it pass without engaging. Fear feeds on attention. Certainty starves it. The fourth step is consistency, not repetition. Consistency means returning to the same inner position whenever you notice yourself slipping back into effort. Not judging yourself, not correcting aggressively, just choosing again. This is how authority is built. Quietly, naturally. You don't need special moments or long rituals. In fact, the more ordinary the situation, the more powerful this becomes. In a difficult conversation, stop rehearsing. Decide internally how you expect the interaction to unfold calmly and speak from that place. When money triggers anxiety, stop reviewing the problem. Choose a settled assumption and continue your responsibilities without mental strain. When waiting for news or results, stop counting days. Time is irrelevant to certainty. Certainty does not rush. The more you practice this, the more you'll notice something surprising. Life begins to cooperate. Not all at once, not perfectly, but consistently. Situations resolve with less effort. People respond differently. Opportunities appear where you weren't looking. And the biggest change isn't external, it's internal. You feel steadier. You stop negotiating with fear. You stop arguing with doubt. You realize that power was never about control. It was about position. Every time you choose certainty over effort, you reinforce a new pattern, a pattern where life responds instead of resists. And once this pattern becomes familiar, you'll wonder how you ever lived any other way. Because this isn't about manifestation techniques. It's about how you stand. And the way you stand internally determines how life meets you externally. Calm, unshakable. This is how you apply it, one decision at a time, one sentence at a time, one quiet moment of authority that changes everything that follows.